Welcome to the Sunday Politics here in the West. Do draw up a chair. Coming up, staying or going. Some Europeans tell us they're packing up and leaving the West while others rush to get in. Well, we've granted our guest today full citizenship of the Sunday Politics studio. Well, for the next 23 minutes at any rate. They are Justin Tomlinson, Conservative MP for North Swindon, and the Green MEP Molly Scott-Cato. We'll hear from them in just a moment or two. Thank you for coming in. Well, this week it was all changed for the West's last publicly owned bus company. Thamesdown Transport in Swindon wasn't turning a profit, so it's being sold off. It's part of a long history of councils privatising their services. So should it be the end of the line for councils running companies? Here's Dan O'Brien.
The bus company that's been just the ticket for Swindon for generations.
They don't make buses like this anymore. It's a vintage Daimler double-decker, proudly bearing the name of Thamesdown Transport since the 1970s, an era when almost all of our local buses were run by local government.
Most, like the famous Bristol omnibus, disappeared decades ago. Thamesdown was the last council-owned bus company in the West, but this week it was sold off.
We've now got a lot of national operators running bus services. They've got a lot of financial muscle that a small municipal bus company can't compete with. So really, in the current climate, we don't have any choice. But I do see this as a really good development for bus users. And also it's a good deal for the taxpayers of Swindon as well, in that they will no longer have to subsidise the bus service.
Thamesdown Transport is being sold to one of the big bus companies, Go Ahead, who are promising brand new vehicles and new technology, like paying for your ticket with your mobile phone. Ideas that would have been unheard of when this bus was rumbling through the streets of Swindon.
But passengers aren't convinced.
I rely on the bus completely. I have no access to private transport at all. And for the council to decide just to sell it off is just ridiculous.
I don't like it really. I shouldn't have a council owned. Yes. Because you never know what happens to public services. They can cut the services, can't they? So that's what I'm a bit worried about.
All councils are very hard up for money, and we just don't have a choice about it. As long as the services run regularly for people getting into work and things, I think it'll be fine.
Thamesdown's lost money over the last 5 years, but for some it's about more than money.
There's no reason why a council cannot run a publicly owned bus service at a profit if they do it correctly. What's happened here is I think we've not been very financially prudent. It's under Swindon Borough Council, under the Tories, with this company, and that's why it's having to go.
But are council businesses really better run? Bristol Energy launched to much fanfare last year.
So we're an energy company owned by Bristol City Council, and it's kind of representing positive energy.
But it's already needed millions more from the council to keep going. Meanwhile, Bristol Waste, another council-owned company, says it has managed to turn a profit and can use the funds to support the council. So as the public sector pulls out of Swindon's buses, should we be worried or jumping for joy?
Well, glad someone's happy. Justin, you're a Swindon MP. Wasn't it rather nice to have a bus service run by the people, for the people?
Well, actually, I'm a fan of Thamesdown Transport. The bus stop's right in front of my house and I use it often when I'm on my way to Parliament. But the reality is, over the last few years, it lost somewhere in the region of £1.5 million. And they were having to reduce and cut services right across my constituency. And this was causing untold misery, particularly in the rural parts of my constituency and for elderly people who rely on this service. And the challenge is they just did not have the financial power to invest in the most modern technology, the most modern vehicles, efficient vehicles.
Hang on a minute. Just reading the Swindon Advertiser, who know about these things, I think the bus company was on the track to lose about £149,000 this year. The council pays the chief executive £162,000. So for one wage, the cost of one wage, they had their own public transport services in-house.
Yeah, Swindon Advertiser, a great newspaper, but the key is it's been about £1.5 million in the last few years. The reason they've reduced the loss for this year It's because they've cut the services that the people I represent rely on. And this is
well, it's £2 million over 5 years.
Well, this is brought in, so it's £1.5 million over the last 4 years, and this has brought in an opportunity to get that investment to improve the services, the marketing, the better vehicles, the newer vehicles with the technology. We can then get the numbers up, that generates the income. This is a win-win, and as somebody who uses the service, I see this as a real opportunity.
OK, well, he uses those buses, would he know?
Would he know?
Would he know? He knows presumably what he's talking about when about the service in Swindon.
I think the important thing that we saw from the film is that a lot of people are dependent on the buses, and actually 20% of people have turned down jobs because they don't have an adequate bus service. And the statistic in terms of money that I'd like to throw in here is that 40% of bus service revenue actually comes in terms of public money. So we need to have very strong regulation of buses in return for that money. And at the same time, £300 million a year is taken out by shareholders of the bus company. So if it's a public service, people shouldn't be profiting from it.
We're getting quite a lot of figures going on here. But
I haven't got any more, so.
Thank you. But the truth is, in Swindon now they're talking about new buses, perhaps enhancing routes, better service. So do you accept the principle that private companies can be as good as, if not better, than the councils?
I'm not particularly ideological about who owns the buses. What I'm concerned about is that if public money is invested in the service, as it will always be, then there's proper regulation and strong political control to avoid profiteering.
I think there's probably not a million miles difference between us. The council still have a role facilitating, particularly supporting the non-commercially viable routes, but now the council can focus the money on that area rather than the overall operational losses which have come because the company didn't have the expertise, didn't have the economies of scale.
You look up at the M4 to London, where the mayor has got control over the transport, buses and tubes. So at least, you know, the public can vote and choose what they want in terms of fares and services and so on. Now it's completely out of the control of people in Swindon.
But you're comparing apples and pears because in London, high-density public transport is the best form of transport pretty much from everywhere because they've got the numbers so they can offer a comprehensive service. It is a real challenge in our towns up and down the country because a lot of the services, even with the very best bus companies, will always operate at a loss because there isn't the numbers. So there will always be, you can't compare London to these. The best chance we've got here is investing in those new vehicles, the technology to get the numbers up, which helps the environment, and I'm a greenie too, but it also makes it financially sustainable. And if we don't do this, we'll keep losing the services.
Me for smiling. But I think, you know, this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you don't invest properly in buses, if you cut services, if you always invest money in roads rather than in public transport, then you see people starting to depend more on the car. People who don't have a car are disadvantaged, and you see far more actual pollution per mile travelled. So we need to commit to public transport and invest in it properly.
So can you understand people not wanting to get on rickety old buses and so would take their cars?
Because it's now a sort of marginal service for people that don't have an alternative, whereas in a lot of continental cities it's actually the first choice. And I think politicians should be deciding that public transport should always be the first option.
Is privatisation always wrong, do you think?
Not always. It does depend on whether you will get the best service. But if there's a lot of public money invested, then you need to have strong political control.
It's interesting how they're going to make the money when the council can't. Presumably that will mean lower wages, fewer benefits for the staff.
No, the way it comes about is they've got the financial power to invest in the vehicles, which will then be more efficient to run. Remember, the lion's share is actually the travel cost, the fuel costs as they travel around all day long. So having the most efficient modern buses allows their running costs to be lower, which helps on the operational costs.
Just in theory, would you like to see the council run no services at all, no service that a private company could do?
Where there are people with greater expertise in the council, they should always be the first choice.
Molly?
Well, I think very often councils can run services better because they can actually make sure that there isn't money taken out the side to feed profits and to feed shareholders, and that's always my concern when there's privatisation like this.
OK, thank you. The government's Brexit white paper was published this week. I'm sure you've read it, but it shed little light on one of the key questions about our future outside of the EU. What will happen to Europeans already living here? Their future remains unclear. Martin Jones has been speaking to people finding different ways to deal with the uncertainty.
So it is discriminatory because if I'd been non-EU, Gilbert could have been my sponsor.
Evelyn is applying to become British. She's among a growing number of EU citizens doing the same. She's been here 30 years, but she's worried about the future.
Now I feel the need to protect myself because there's a huge anxiety. What will I become now? I do not have this British passport. I only have a French one. After we've come out of the EU, I need somehow to feel protected.
But the process isn't for the faint-hearted. The first stage alone involves an 85-page form and a huge bundle of documents.
It took me a few weeks, really, to gather everything up. And because I was extremely worried about filling it the wrong way, I went down the immigration lawyer route, which not everybody will be able to do. It's extremely expensive. We're talking about £500 I've spent so far, but that may not be the end of it. It may go up to £1,000.
There's also a baffling range of questions.
Have you ever indulged in terrorist activity? Do you ever take part in genocide? You know, something to do on a rainy afternoon, perhaps?
Even so, Evelyn is optimistic, having been in Bristol so long. But what about people who aren't here already? The Romanian consul says he's seen dozens of families rushing to get loved ones into the UK.
The lack of certainty is exacerbating the state of unease. Many of them choose to bring their families quickly over to beat the imaginary deadline, to beat the triggering of the Article 50.
The government has repeatedly said it had hoped to do a deal with other EU countries by now, but the negotiations are taking longer than they thought.
We would appreciate immensely if the government will give clear guidance and indication what the next steps are and what will be the rules governing my community.
British citizens living in the EU are also unsure what will happen. Madrid is now home to Bristolian Fiona Horton, who lives here with her boyfriend. She can't become Spanish, so she applied for an Irish passport.
I had never considered myself an Irish citizen before. My mum's actually Northern Irish, so I don't think she'd ever considered herself an Irish citizen before. But she's now got an Irish passport as well. So I just see it as I've got EU residency for as long as I want it. I can stay in Spain, I can move somewhere else, I've got freedom of travel.
But for some, the uncertainty has been the final straw.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, all right?
Wojtek is selling his home in Bridgewater. He's been a lorry driver here for the last 10 years, and he loves this country, even the thing that infuriates the rest of us.
I think I miss the weather.
You'll miss the weather?
Yeah, it's lovely, isn't it? Because if you've got a couple of sunny days, you're so happy you've got them, isn't it? You just appreciate sunny days so much.
He'd thought about returning to Poland before, but Brexit convinced him.
It tipped the balance after referendum, that half of the people are not entirely happy with you here. So it doesn't matter what you're doing, if you're picking up the kids in the morning, or leaving them at school, or going to the pub, whatever, you still got this feeling now that half of the people are not entirely happy with you.
Wojtek and many like him feel the government is playing with their future. So he and his family will now build a new life away from Britain.
And of course we wish you well, Wojtek. Well, Molly, why won't the rest of the EU guarantee that our citizens can stay when we leave the EU?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I think it's incredibly sad to see somebody like Wojtek there really saying that he now feels unwelcome and he's wondering who in the playground doesn't want him and his children to be there. That's a really sad outcome from the whole Brexit debate and the referendum. But to answer your question, I think this is a real opportunity that's been missed here, because if we'd gone in at the beginning and said, well, OK, we've decided to leave, but we're going to protect all EU citizens who are already here and all their rights, then the European countries would probably have responded in kind, and all
but
this
we've made it pretty
could have
clear. I mean, all the statements from government
avoided.
have said we're just waiting on the reciprocal arrangement.
I know,
so
but
why aren't they, I mean, it's them playing hardball, not the
because
government.
we've made the change. We've said we're going to change the conditions, so we should have made a firm offer at the beginning to protect all EU citizens here. And then the same offer would have come back. That was very clear. And it was Theresa May's...
It was clear, was it?
Yeah.
So you've had those assurances that they would?
It was clear from that side, and I think Theresa May's statement that those people were going to be bargaining chips caused a lot of disappointment at the European side.
She didn't say that. But I mean, but they're actually, I'm not sure about the exact words, but they are bargaining chips at the moment, aren't they?
The Prime Minister's made it clear this is the absolute priority. There is we are expecting this to be resolved as quickly as possible. We wish it had been resolved by now.
Why not make a big, generous offer now, just saying, look, of course we're not going to be sending people home.
The Prime Minister couldn't be any
welcome.
more public in her intentions on this, and we just need the reciprocal deals to come back. It's a question now of crossing the T's, dotting the I's. We wish it could have been done sooner. It's the absolute priority. It was set out clearly in the white paper, and it's an important thing as part of these negotiations going forward.
You see, we were told, weren't we, that all these negotiations will be relatively easy. Now, the first step, actually just guaranteeing that Brits and Spain don't have to come home and so on, even that can't be resolved. It's not going to be easy. The EU is going to be playing hardball.
Well, there's going to be ups and downs, and we'll play hardball as well. And I'm grateful that in the Prime Minister we've got someone who's very strong when it comes to negotiations.
So would you play hardball on this issue?
We don't need to play hardball because there is consensus from us, the government, and also from our European friends. It is just a question of now of organising all of the relevant paperwork and rules to make sure this is put in place. This is not going to be something that's contentious. There will be elements that will be challenged.
The people in our film thought it was contentious.
Well, they shouldn't do, because there is a will from our government, there's a will from our European neighbours and friends to have this resolved, and rightly so. We wish it had been done by now, and on this one, it hasn't yet. But remember, the overall negotiations are to take place over 2 years. This is something we're trying to do
So even
ahead
more
of that.
uncertainty for them.
I think all this chat about hardball and, you know, tough negotiation and upping the ante, it's really unhelpful. It's actually economically damaging as well now. I mean, I heard today from Bournemouth that there's a big drop-off in terms of people applying to language school. We're seeing the same with foreign students coming to our universities. There's a sense of people not being welcome, and that's really economically damaging, because some of our most important service exports are, in fact, in the field of education.
On the other hand, Molly, people voted to leave, and immigration was undoubtedly a big issue in that decision. A lot of people feel there are too many immigrants here.
Okay, so the question of immigration is very confused and very complicated. We're not actually talking about immigration as such here. We're talking about freedom of movement. It's a reciprocal right. So European people can come here and we can go to their countries. So it benefited both of us, and I think that's what we need to protect, that British people, especially British young people, can still travel and study and work abroad.
Yeah, but let's look at this is the government white paper which I've been studying. So take, for example, Poland. According to the government, there are 900,000, about 1 million Poles here. But when you look over the page to see how many Brits there are in Poland, it's probably a couple of hundred, 1,000 or so.
That's not.
So why would you want to guarantee their rights?
Because it's not a direct transfer like that. So British people often retire to Spain and France. They're not necessarily going to Poland, whereas Polish bricklayers may want to come here. But I think the important point is that these discussions are already happening at the European level, because actually there's problems caused in Poland if all their young, skilled people come here. And in the case of Lithuania, out of 4 million people, 1 million are actually living abroad now, and it's all the useful young people. So actually the Greens and Peasant Party won the election in Lithuania recently on this point about trying to bring young people home.
But free movement is going to be restricted, isn't it, when we leave? There's no doubt about that.
Yes, well, if we're outside the single market, it will. But I still think it will be very economically damaging to leave the single market. And the question is, are people prepared to trade off the loss of their jobs, the loss of their income, higher prices, against restricting immigration? And the surveys show they're not prepared to lose anything financially in order to restrict immigration.
Well, I mean, that's the doomsday scenario that lost the referendum last year. The reality is, since Brexit's taken place, our economy is the strongest growing of any of the major developed economies. The Bank of England yet again revised up growth figures. We have record employment in every single region of the country. We have a very clear sign that we're open for trade. And this isn't a new thing. It's not a new challenge. 2/3 of our expats live in other countries outside of the EU, and we have arrangements with them. But rightly, we've got to make sure that the arrangements are reciprocal, and that is something that we will get done as quickly as possible. There's a genuine will to see this happen.
Is there something to be said just because all the predictions about economic catastrophe, so far at least, appear to be wrong?
Well, I think it's important to say that nothing's actually changed, because we're still members of the EU. The big changes will come when we leave. The main change that's happened so far is that there's been a fall in the pound. We were at a farm today that was saying that's very difficult because they also produce goods and they have to import, ingredients, and those are much more expensive. So there are already economic effects.
OK, I expect we'll return to this topic again, don't you? Thank you. Well, now let's whiz through the political news in the West in 60 seconds. This was the week, some say, turkeys voted for Christmas. Well, 6 out of 9 councils in Dorset voted to abolish themselves and merge into 2. The Secretary of State will now decide. Gloucestershire Council published the contract for a controversial incinerator online. It thought it had hidden sensitive details, but basic computer skills could reveal everything. An investigation's been launched. Two of Bristol's Labour MPs defied Jeremy Corbyn's instructions on Brexit. Kerry McCarthy and Thangam Debonair voted against triggering Article 50, saying it's what their constituents wanted. And crowds gathered in Cheltenham, Swindon and in Bristol to protest against Donald Trump.
No hate, no fear. Donald Trump not wanted here.
And more people in Bristol West signed a petition against a Trump state visit than in any other constituency. Right, we're going to talk about Mr. Trump. It's going to be great. Molly, I guess probably not a fan, just a wild stab in the dark there. But do you think his policies, particularly on immigration, might actually be quite popular here?
I think that the problem is we don't really know what his policies are. You know, he'll tweet one thing, he'll tweet something completely different. And I think we've seen a great deal of opposition to him coming here. And regardless of what people might think of his policies, it's really his attitude towards women, his attitude towards people of different race, and his really, quite frankly, white supremacist friends that are causing people a lot of concern. And I don't think we should be paying him this honour of a state visit.
But if you look at the polls in this country, there is quite a lot of support. I think 49% say that you know, they would quite like the same restrictions on those 7 countries that he's brought in.
Yeah, because I think people are now whipped up into a sort of frenzy of concern that isn't about rational policy making. Because if you look at the 7 countries where he's banned people from going into the US, there hasn't been a single terrorist attack from anybody from any of those countries. So it's nothing to do with rational policy making. It's to do with using fear against certain groups to build his power.
Justin, do you think that the Prime Minister made a bit of a slip-up going so quickly and holding hands?
No, I don't at all. First of all, what you and I would do in terms of voting in the American elections is irrelevant. He's democratically elected. We may find his policies abhorrent. I suspect they will be counterproductive. But the reality is we have a special relationship with America that's gone back from when we fought wars together, trade agreements, and that will be in place long beyond when President Trump is holding the high office. And we have a duty, because we are respected worldwide, to engage, to challenge, to influence. We've had many leaders. We've had many leaders come to visit this country of questionable morals, questionable policies. But we do that because we have an important role in the global.
I don't think that's
do you think it's important that we get a trade deal with the States?
I think what's important is that we maintain our reputation for being a country that defends human rights. And I think if we carry on, because of our weakness coming out of the European Union, making friends to somebody who has such abhorrent policies, I think it's going to really damage our international standing at just the time when we need it to be strong.
Would you push for a trade deal, or say, actually, we'd rather be poorer?
What he means by a good trade deal is the kind of trade deal that would destroy the sort of farmers I was talking to this morning, and I don't think that would be good for the South West.
OK, we have to leave it there. Thank you. And that's it from the West this week. My thanks to my guests, Justin Tomlinson and Molly Scott-Cato.